Greetings and salutations. I am Admiral André and this is Buzz Aldrin's Space Program Manager. This is the first episode of the first series on this channel and I hope that it will be an enjoyable experience for you. If you want to know more about this channel, please see my previous video about the introduction. So let's jump right into this game. Buzz Aldrin Space Program Manager has of course been out for a while already, but I play this quite often and I find it to be very enjoyable because no experience is ever the same, and that's of course a very important feature of any game, especially those games that I like. So as I mentioned before in the introductory video to this channel, you'll see a lot of strategy and space-related games on this channel, but I think the main feature will be the replayability. So whatever you see here will not be exactly the same as on any other channel. So let's begin. Preferences, I set the music very low, the sound effects as well, but I'm recording this audio separately, my voice from the in-game audio, so I will be able to tweak that while I'm putting the video together. Single player, new game. First choices we have to make, sandbox or campaign. I've never played a sandbox game in this game. I've also never played the GSA campaign because for me the main value in this game is the competitive aspect between the Soviet and US races to the moon. So I'm very glad the developers took that spirit from the original Buzz Aldrin's Race into Space, and you'll see the link in the description below. It's available freely now. And originally when they made Buzz Aldrin's Space Program Manager, they only focused on the Global Space Agency. So based on feedback from players, they decided to incorporate the old element of the space race, which to me is the most valuable feature of this game. So there's no question we are going to play a campaign. The choice here, Soviet or US, I've thought about it a little and I think the US one will actually make a better first playthrough. And the reason for that is because the US space program is more well known, I think, more well known generally, at least. In Russia, I'm sure the Soviet program was very well known, but I think the US one is quite clear to most people. I mean, Project Apollo and all those things. So let's start with that, and maybe in some future series we can follow up with the Soviet one if people think that it would be worthwhile doing. I personally would very much enjoy it. Difficulty levels, no question, it has to be normal for the first one. I've done several normal games, I've done several hard ones, but I've never actually managed to finish a hard game. Because when they speak about difficulty level, they say downgrades for mission components after a failed mission will be relatively low or moderate or very high. But I think there's more to it than that. In my experience, the research projects that you have also proceeds much slower at higher difficulty levels. I don't know if it's just my ineptitude, but I think that's one of the things that I've encountered. And for a YouTube series, especially a first one, I think let's just get into the action and not make it super difficult. So we begin. And NASA has been established. Of course, in real life, NASA was not established in 1955, but this is, you can look at it as an alternate reality game. Obviously, nothing here will be exactly the same as in history as we know it, but that's the fun thing. You don't know what's going to happen. So, NASA has been established, and of course, I am the director or the administrator of NASA, so already a lot of stress is placed on my shoulders. Dr. Werner von Braun is here to welcome me now. He is an engineer, of course, specializing in rocket design, and he just talks about the duties that I have to assume. I have to manage the space agency, I have to visit the various buildings and hire people and proceed with programs and launch them and so on. So that's fine. We'll encounter all these things as we go along. So I'm going to just proceed. A very important aspect to this game, and one I'm actually going to use to structure these YouTube videos, is the concept of the budget season or budget period. And in this game, the budget is reviewed every 4 years. So that's every 16 turns, because every 1 year has 4 quarters and thus 4 turns. And that actually makes it nice for me to split off the videos and just structure everything. However, I think 16 turns is going to be far too long for each video. So I think 8 turns, in other words, a half of a budget period, 2 years, will make a nice, I think, time period for me. And the reason for that is because in the beginning of the game, nothing much happens, so that's not a problem. But as you go on in the late 60s especially, there's so many things happening that it's just going to take far too long to include 16 turns in one video. And I don't want to make these videos super long. Obviously, I'm not too worried about an exact time, but I don't want to sit here for an hour and a half and bore everyone. So let's get to it. Our budget for the next 4 years, that is until the end of 1958, is $3,000 per turn or per quarter. Depending on the prestige that we get at the end of 1958, our budget for the next period will be set on that prestige. The maximum we can get is 1875, and the maximum amount of money the President and Congress and so on will give us is $10,000 per season or per quarter. And actually, it's very important for us to meet our prestige target, because if we don't, and I've experienced this myself, it will actually hamper all of our progress after that point and make it even more difficult for us to meet our next target as well. So here we are, we're at the new Space Center. Some of the buildings already exist, the headquarters, that's where we put our missions together and execute them. We also have the set center, the scientists, engineers and technicians building, and this will be a very important one for us. This is one of the key structures that we will have. Another one here, the Public Affairs Office, is not so important, but it still gives you a lot of information in terms of your funds, your budget review, and so on. Okay, so you can see here in the corner is our Public Affairs Officer, and she will also allow us to look at the goals comparison between the US and the Soviet Union. This will also be very important for us because it will allow us to get a very quick overview of how our efforts compare with that of the Soviet Union. Obviously, nothing has been achieved yet. It's far too early for that, so we can just close that. So from time to time, we will come back to the space or the Public Affairs Office, so it's not super important at the moment. The last building that already exists here is the Museum of Spaceflight, and this is where we can just view our historical progression, and as our flight crews may or may not die during missions, I don't want to say that too loudly, we can come here and then visit the memorial wall as well. But I'm really hoping that doesn't happen, but I've only ever had one game in which there were no casualties, so I'm not hopeful. So time to exit and go back to the overview. Now you can see there are some gaps here. These buildings still need to be constructed, and if we want to just get an overview, we click the magnifying glass and it gives us the labels of the different buildings. So what's missing is the vehicle assembly building, the astronaut complex or astronaut center, and the mission control center. Now of course we can't do anything without these, so our first order of business is to construct them. I'm not worried about the money now. We need these buildings, so there's no question of it. Okay, so that is now in progress, and it will take a season or two, depending on the individual building, to complete that. The next thing we have to do is go to the set center, and you can see already we have 5 people working for us, 5 scientists and engineers and so on. And unfortunately, some of these individuals are not very good at what they do. So as an administrator, I have to make the difficult decision and get rid of some of them. Not literally, of course, but dismiss them. Here, the first one, he has not got very good skills, but for me, more important than that, as well as more important than the salary and the morale, is the learning capacity. That overrides everything else in my view, because over time you're going to train these people anyway, because you want to improve their skills. But if the person has got a 68, for instance, learning capacity, you're not going to get a big return out of your investment, which is unfortunate, but we've got to get rid of them because we need every advantage that we can get. I mean, the Soviets are out there and they are aiming for the moon, and we cannot take chances. Everyone else here seems decent. We've got an 80 here, which is not so ideal either. I'm actually going to get rid of him as well. I'm sorry, but it has to be done. Sergio is very good in a lot of things. If you look at the skills, for example, you'll see that the good ones will be in the 50s by default. Sometimes, very rarely, you'll find someone with a 60% skill, and that's about as high as they can get on their own when you begin with them. Over time, people will improve their skills as they work on missions and so on, but it's a very good idea to actually do some training, and you can see the option here for advanced training. Everyone goes through basic training, but we need to progress with their individual skills, so that's where the advanced training comes in. So let's go and hire some more people, because the set center at the moment can take 7 personnel, and of course we've only got 3, and it's very important for us to maximize everything, because at some point you'll find everybody's going through training and you need other people to be free and ready to work on your projects. You can also only hire people for each individual category. For example, the set center, once per year. So once we hire them, there's no more hiring for the rest of the year. So let's see. I'm already seeing a lot of good people here. Sarah here is she's a level 95 in her learning capacity, and she's got some rockets and human rated rocket skills, so I definitely want her on my team. Nick here is also good. He's got rockets and human rated rockets again, and a 92 learning capacity, so he's got to come with us. Camila here has a level 90 or 90% on her learning capacity, and she is good in a lot of things, including space probes and crewed spacecraft and EVA suits, so definitely a no-brainer. The rest of them, I'm only seeing 2 people who's got a learning capacity in the 90s, and that is a definite criteria of mine. So that's Michael here, and who was the other person? Dante. So his skills are not so good, but Michael is much better, so there we go. That's it. I'm not too worried about specific skills. Of course it helps with rockets and all of that, but that's where the training comes in. And before I look at that, let me just say it. You'll see the morale level of the individual employees is not so good at the moment, and there's 2 ways you can change that. Obviously you want it to be higher, because if it's low, people can decide to quit, and all of the investment that you've put into them, all of the training and all of that will obviously go with them. So you want to keep your people happy and obviously keep them around. So the 2 ways you can do that is if you keep them busy as much as possible their morale will increase. Not by much, but it will improve over time. And you'll usually find the set people are the ones who improve the most consistently, because you're not going to use all of your astronauts all of the time. So the other way comes into play, and that is by managing the department and giving people a pay rise. And of course everybody loves that, so that will make them happier. And I also noted that in a lot of playthroughs on YouTube, people tend to ignore or not really take note of this aspect of the game. So I'm going to increase their salaries to about 90%. It's measured in their average morale, so 90% is obviously very good. It'll differ, you'll see 76 and 100 and so on, so it's the average, and that makes it just a bit more acceptable to me. Obviously the cost is important, and especially so in the beginning of the game, because we don't have a lot of money and we have a lot of things to construct and a lot of people to hire. But still, I find that these kinds of investments will pay for themselves in the long run. So what's there left for us to do now? The first thing is we can go back to the set center and decide to send people to more advanced training. And I can already see that I want to send 2 of the 3 available people for training. Sergio has a good skill in space probes, and that's the only thing we can start researching at the moment, because we don't have a vehicle assembly building yet, and therefore we can't put rockets together. The other 2 here, Brady, he's got poor skills in everything, but he's got a decent learning capacity. And Marcus has also got an average skill in most things, so in the long run that will not really do, so we must improve that. We just must decide in terms of what. Now, we've hired some people who are good in rockets, so I think we can put people into space probes. And you get the choice of either continuous training or a single training course, which is 3 seasons or 9 months. And it's usually a good idea to do a single training course, especially for your set people, because you want to use them. For your astronauts, it is more sensible to start off with continuous training, so you don't have to keep putting them in training programs. It just happens automatically. For Brady, I think we should start also with space probes. These will be very important skills going into the future, so we only have 1 person free, but that's fine. 1955 is just dedicated to setting up your space center, so don't feel bad if you're not doing a lot of things. It's fine. Everybody must set the foundation first, and of course the better you do that, the greater the chances of your success. And obviously the Russians are doing the same. So we've got only really one choice now. We can't open any other programs other than Earth-based programs, and it's the best to start with the Earth orbiting research satellites, because that also mirrors the historical experience. For the US, we only have 4 choices overall for the Earth satellites, and we have to really start with the Explorer 1 because it's the smallest and the lightest. If you want to get more information, you can just mouse over and you'll see it comprises of a launch and deployment of a satellite with its instrumentation. You have 2 choices, a regular mission, which is only 1 season, or an extended one that will give more prestige, but it takes 3 seasons, and obviously it will mean while that's going on you can not really do so many other things, but in the beginning that tends to be fine. Also, if you click on the information icon, you'll see a better overview, and you'll see the mass here, which is going to be very important when we come to the rockets. 11 kilograms is not much. There's any of our rockets can really lift this payload, but it's something to keep in mind, because you will need to really develop your rockets with the goal in mind. So we'll talk more about that later on, but for now we just accept and we click on it and we open the program. So that's our very first satellite program. We don't have a rocket yet, so that's fine. And there's Werner von Braun ready to give his assessment about this, about the status of this project. Of course, because we don't have a rocket, he can't really give us that assessment, but even I can say it's a very poor prospect of success because we haven't done nothing and we don't even have any mission controllers. Anyway, we just need to put Sergio into this project so he can start with improving the actual equipment. You'll see the projected improvement is 12.9% per turn, which is of course not very high, but he's the only one working on it, and it's fine. We have enough time for that, so it's not a problem. I just want to highlight also, you can see I put Sergio in the very first slot here, and you really need to do that. You need to organize your people by skill, and it has to go from high to low, from left to right. If I put Sergio in the second slot, you'll see the projected improvement is only 9.3%, even though he's still the only one working on it, and even though the only thing I've done was move him from this spot to this one. So I guess it has to do with the organization of the project, who's the project leader and so on. So it's better to just make sure that your people are always organized in the most optimum way. So that's it. We just go back to the Space Center, and there's nothing more we can do this turn. Like I said, 1955 is just for getting started. So yes, and we'll get a nice overview of the work that's been done this season. And if you want more information about any specific component, you can just click on the information icon. And you can see again that the Explorer 1 is a very lightweight but capable satellite design. Using the latest technologies in electronics, the satellite is equipped with a radio signal transmitter and an array of sensors, which allows it to study the Earth's magnetic field and measure radiation levels in space, which will of course be very important if we want to start with a manned space program. So we just say proceed, and we'll get our bulletin news report now, which always happens between seasons. And you see we've got a lot going on. There's not always this much news. The red ones will always be related to either a failure of ours or something that the Soviets have done. So the CIA has thoughtfully prepared a little report for us here, and they have found out that the Soviet Space Agency has opened Sputnik 1 and Vostok. And it's not too much to worry about. This usually happens. If you're playing as the Soviets, you'll see the Americans usually start off with the Explorer satellite, as we have done, as well as the X-15 spaceplane. But I don't want to open a program if I have no one working on it, because it costs us money to have a program open each turn. We've dismissed some employees, we've hired some employees, we've opened the Explorer 1 program, we've started construction, and one of the buildings is finished. And Kennedy is just giving us a bit of guidance here. Again, much earlier than in history. It's still only 1955, but that's fine. It's an alternate history game, so it's actually nice to have a bit of flavor. So he's just saying we must make it to the moon, so our goal has been set, and we just get a bit more information about the budgets and so on. But we already know that. So the next step is to hire mission controllers, because the building is now finished, and we'll get this information that there are no employees available. We must recruit some. So the same thing applies. We look at the learning capacity and the skills, but learning capacity is quite important. At the beginning we can only hire 5 people, which you can see at the bottom there. And I usually go for somebody who's good overall. So Annelle here is going to be our flight director, because she has a lot of skills, a lot of good skills in the different categories. So, and she's got an 89 learning capacity, so it's a no-brainer. She's she's in. Then we've got somebody here, Shantae, who's good with propulsion and the trajectory in GNC, so she's in, no question. I spread the skills around, so I have somebody who's good with everything, and then we have our specialists as well, which will be very important going ahead. We've got an 85. I just want to see if there's somebody who's a bit better than that. Doesn't look like it. It's not exactly the best crop of people, but that's okay, we work with that. We've got Nakita here, and I think she, even though her skills are quite average, she's got a very good learning capacity. It seems like she's actually the best of the whole lot, so she's in. Then we've got Luke Hatch here, who's good with spacecraft systems and crew and payload, so he's in. And we just have to have a look, propulsion, and I think we're going to have to get a propulsion person, because who's here? Shantae is good with trajectory as well, so she can focus on that. So we must just decide between these two. And because their learning capacity is the same, I'll just take the one with the highest skill. So that's Jackson. So there we go, hire recruits. And they will now go into their basic training for 6 months, which is fine because their jobs have quite a lot of responsibility. So we just need to make sure their morale level goes up, and I pay my people well, so I look after them. That's it. There's nothing more we can do right now, so it's time to move on to the third quarter of the year. Our Explorer 1 project is progressing quite slowly, unfortunately. So, news again, our set personnel graduated, hired flight controllers, and the construction has been completed. So you see now we've got our final space center here. Obviously some buildings will be upgraded as we go, but we'll never have any new buildings, so we're set to go for the first period. First things, astronaut complex. The problem with the astronauts is their skills tend to start off quite mediocre, actually. Even when it's in the 50s like Mary Hawkins here. The problem is they will have such a big impact on your mission that it will take a long time to actually get their skills up to a desirable level. And this is especially problematic because a lot of skills come into play during the different missions. So leadership, piloting and fitness, those are usually the three main ones. So you want to get all three of them to a very high level. The EVA skill is also obviously important if you want to send someone on an EVA, which will make 4 skills, and then if you want them to know anything about science, you also have to put them through a science training program. That's then all 5 that you have to do. Mary Hawkins, no question, she's in. Joseph Hill, I think, has got a good learning capacity, so we can run with that. It's really the most important thing I find with astronauts, to make sure their learning capacity is high, because they will anyway have mediocre skills. So pick the people who can learn the quickest and the most for the money that you invest in them. Linda Purvis is very good, she's definitely in. Dennis Larson, definitely in. And Lawrence Hunt, I think, is also worthy. So we've got 5 people. Let me just see. We can hire maybe one more. Stephen Lewis here, he's got a 90 in learning. And the others are not so good. So I'm not going to hire the 7th person at the moment. We're just going to keep it to the 6, which is actually not bad. Because I found that sometimes you don't get more than 3 or 4 decent candidates. But that's fine. We don't need to hire all of them in one go. We just need to get their basic training started. And that's especially important because their basic training is 4 seasons. Because obviously their job is the most critical of all. And they need all of these skills, so they need their basic training for an entire year. Again, the management of the department is important. because these people you want to keep, and you want to keep them alive, obviously. So I pay them very well. 95, that's fine. So the average morale is 95. You can see Linda Purvis is a bit under that, but that's okay. As she goes through training and we keep her busy and working on things, that morale level will still improve. So there we go. Now the last thing we have to do is get the Mission Control Center. Just check up there. It is already underway, so that's not a problem. So the last thing then, before I end the turn, is to look at the people that we hired for the set center. So that's the key. So we've got some skills now, and we've got the vehicle assembly building ready. So now is the time to begin working on rockets. And you don't want to wait too long on this. As you can see, we have quite a few options, but we can't build the bigger rockets yet because we don't have a large enough vehicle assembly building, but that's fine. That's something that we will work on as we go along. You've got some choices here though, and I found that it's never really worth it for me to research every single rocket. Obviously, when you have a rocket to a very high level of reliability, that spills over into the other ones because you can take those skills forward into your other rocket programs. But it usually happens that I skip, for example, the Redstone booster and I go straight for the Atlas. And usually the Thor Able, I think I skip that one as well. But it depends. Obviously, everything doesn't happen in the same order all the time. So we'll see how that goes. Jupiter C, that's a no-brainer. We have to start with the smallest one and the cheapest one because we don't have a lot of money. And it's got a payload capacity, which you can remember we looked at before, of 11 kilograms to orbit, and that's exactly what we need. So obviously the Jupiter C will not be able to lift anything other than the Explorer 1, but it's a good practice for us. So we open it, and I just go back to the overview here, and let's see. If we now look at our skills, you see here we've got a couple of people good with rockets, and the last one here, actually, Michael is more skilled with human-rated rockets and EVA suits, but obviously we have to keep him busy. So I'm just going to put him in here, and he'll help a little. Our projected improvement is 22.4%, so that's perfect. And the other person, Camilla, we will put on the space probe. So it's going to be 40.5% at the end of this term. So we're moving along, but as I said, it's still in the foundation phase, and we just click next and move on. So the Explorer 1 has now had a huge jump. You can see it's progressed more in this turn than it has before this turn, and of course the Jupiter C has got at least some reliability now. So, end of 1955, this is the last quarter, and it just gives us the overview again. We already know all this. We really want to be looking out for the random events and for what the Soviet Union is up to. So we've got 2 more people from the set center who are free and available. So let me just see if there's anyone better in rockets. Not really, these are mostly Space Pro people, and that's fine. 73% is actually a really, really good skill, so he has to be the lead scientist on this project. So now we're going to really progress quickly, and that's a good thing because that will allow us to start working on the next satellite in a reasonably short amount of time. Now, it's usually a good thing also to look at the bottom here and just look at the numbers. If you see numbers in the first slot here, like this one, that means you've got people who are not assigned to anything, and they're basically not, they're wasting time. So let's look at the Mission Control Center, and these people are critical. I cannot stress that enough. it's something that I only learned late in my experience with Buzz Aldrin, Space Program Manager, because I would hire them and I would train them a little, and then I would just start using them. And obviously you have to make a trade-off in terms of their training versus actually using them. But much of the breakdowns and problems that you will experience is actually due to their skills not being high enough. And the main thing that caught me out before was that later on in the more advanced programs, you'll actually need more than one person in a single skill. So for example, propulsion is usually just one person, so that's fine. But let's say spacecraft systems, you'll find you need 2 or even 3 people who are good with that. And if one of them is not, for example, that person has a 30% skill and it happens to be the only person who's free, that's really going to hurt you, because they will impact everything that has to do with spacecraft systems. We'll also need another mission or flight controller, but for now we're fine. So I just want to get people started. So Anel here, who's our flight director, like I said, you really want all her skills to be good, which usually means that your flight director is the weak link in any mission. And the reason for that is because if you have someone specializing in propulsion, for example, you can focus all of your training efforts on that one skill and get them to be really, really excellent. But your flight director, because they have to spread their training across all these skills, and their contribution to the mission is an average of these scores, you'll find that they are always lower than the specialists. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to start by raising her lowest skill, which is the trajectory and GNC, and just a single training course is fine at the moment. We've got somebody who's good with propulsion, so we just start on that training. Then let me just see, I don't want to duplicate anything. So our next one is spacecraft systems and crew and payloads, as well as trajectory and GNC. We've got somebody now, but she's the mission director, so that's fine. So she can work on trajectory and GNC. Shantae, and let's see, crew and payloads and spacecraft systems. So those are the ones that are not assigned yet. So I'm just going to put Luke Hatch on spacecraft systems and Nikita on crew and payloads. And that's it. So we've done everything we can. Time to move on. So here we are. The Explorer 1 has now reached almost 60% of reliability, which is very good, but you do want that to be more than 80%, and the game will really punish you if it's not. I found that sometimes I'll try to actually use a mission to improve a component's reliability, because if you have a successful mission, your projected or your reliability will actually improve. But if it's not 80%, the game tends to punish you, and you'll have a failure, and actually the thing will be downgraded and you'll end off worse than you were. The booster is far behind the space probe here, but it's still decent, and obviously we've got good people working on it, so I'm not worried about that. Bad news, oh dear. The R&D process has experienced a significant setback. Your R&D results will get a penalty of 5.7% during the next one season. So that's a bit unfortunate, but at least it's not a long time and it's a very small amount, so it's not too bad. The Soviets, on the other hand, seem to be quite ambitious. They've opened their Sputnik 2 program now, but yeah, that means they're actually going to have less money available because they have to pay for all these programs, so that's actually a good thing for us, I think. No one is done with their training, so there's nothing we can do. Move on. Explorer 1 is almost ready, and the Jupiter C is halfway. I never looked at the description, which you can see here. The Jupiter C, or the Juno 1, is an ICBM which has been upgraded in order to send very light satellites to low Earth orbit. The main difference with the original military version consists of the addition of small solid propellant-fueled upper stages that allow the payload to achieve orbit. So it's just nice to get a bit of flavor and history of these different components, so I like reading that. But I won't do it all the time. No news this season, which is of course good news as we saw last season. And we've still got no one available. Everyone is busy, so we move on. You'll find that time tends to fly very quickly in the beginning of this game, because you'll have people busy with training, developing your first programs, and there's not really much happening other than that. If we just look at our Public Affairs Office, you can see there's not even enough data about our funds and expenditures, or of course our prestige, because we haven't done anything yet. But neither have the Soviets, so that's fine by me. And we go to the third quarter of 1956. So 1956 as well is a very slow year, but it's very important to just get things going. Following astronauts have graduated, and the flight controllers have also graduated from their advanced training. So I'll start with them, because what I do is I just put them straight back to more training, because obviously our program is not ready to go yet. The Juno rocket is not finished, and the Explorer 1 is not finished either. So I'm just putting Jackson back to more propulsion, Luke for spacecraft systems, Nikita for crew and payloads, and Shantae is the trajectory and GNC person, and that just leaves Anel. Now Anel is of course the one with the best average skill, so she will be the flight controller. So I just have to look at what's the weak link now, and that's crew and payload, so I just put her through another training session. Astronauts, here's the thing with the astronauts. Leadership is the single most important skill for everything that they do. Because as you can read in the description here, leadership is the capacity to remain calm under pressure and to use good judgment in order to make decisions. And even though it says here the commanders should have a good skill in that, everybody needs a good skill in that. So this is where the continuous training comes in. So I'll just say leadership and continuous, because now you can set a target. So let's say the target is 80%. 80% is a good level, and it's also a good compromise between getting a good level but not taking forever to do it. If you put it to 90%, it tends to slow things down, because as the people get higher and higher skills, the improvements every turn will be much less. So 80% is a good compromise. They will also improve this, of course, through successful missions, but the problem is unsuccessful missions will, let's say it will set back all of their skills definitively, which we want to avoid, of course, but I don't think it's really avoidable. The big thing with this game is the odds. It's all about odds and randomness, and you never know. Even if you have a mission that has a chance of 95% of succeeding, there's that 5%, and it tends to creep up on you. So failure is part of the game, and failure is part of life, so we just have to deal with it. And it's also part of the fun, I think. It can be a bit frustrating at times, but the thing is, how you deal with those failures will really determine how you get along in this game and in life in general. And of course, if we let that set us back, the Soviets will just take the lead, and I'm not going to allow that. The president is on my back, Congress is on my back, the Senate is on my back, and of course everyone is complaining about the Soviets and everything, so the stress is really on me as the administrator to do a good job. So if I get stressed, that's why. Let's end 1956, or well, the last season anyway. you can see our Explorer 1 satellite is, in my opinion, ready to go. Its projected reliability in the next turn will be 86%, which is really good, I think. And the problem, of course, is the rocket is not ready, but that's okay. Our mission controllers are also still busy with training. So this is where I can start working on another satellite. Good news, a significant discovery will boost the results of the R&D process by 19% during the next 3 seasons. So this actually more than offsets our previous bad news, which was the penalty we got. So things tend to work out. So let's have a look at the components here. Explorer 1, the projected reliability, if we just continue researching it, is going to be 89%, which is not a problem, but these people can do other work, I think. And we should probably get started on the X-15, our first manned vehicle. Even though it says here it's a space plane, it's not really a space plane. It just goes to the edge of space. But still, that will give us a lot of good data on how people perform and how equipment will perform at very, very high altitudes and high speeds, of course. So you'll see this program consists of a rocket-powered experimental aircraft that can reach velocities over Mach 6 and altitudes of over 100 kilometers, which is technically space then. So it just touches the edge of space. So we can just open that. Of course, the skill here is different than the Explorer 1. You'll see it is, okay, no one is available. That's not a problem. We can reassign them. But we need the crewed spacecraft skill here. I don't, however, want to take anybody off of the rocket program because that is the most critical thing for us now. We need to finish it. So I just take everyone off here. And even if their skills are not great for crewed spacecraft, they can get started on the X-15. Which is not bad actually. Camilla here with a 57% is actually going to give us a good boost. The projected reliability is already past a third, 36.2%. So we will actually be gaining a lot from that. Everybody else is busy, and that's it for this turn, and I think for this video. We've now had 2 years of our space program here, and I know it's not been very eventful, but the beginning usually is not very eventful of any game. So it was just about getting started and putting everything in place that we will need. And already something that I learned from this video is I must disable pop-ups here in the bottom because people are sending me messages, and of course that's part of life. I have to learn as I go along. So anyway, please join me on this journey. I hope that this has at least been a little bit interesting for you. Leave me some comments and some feedback if you like that I can use to improve, because if it's not enjoyable for you, there's no real point to it. Then I'm just talking to myself, which can be interesting and fun, but that's a different story entirely. So we will pick up here. I'm just going to save the game so you see also I save it. These are some of my older ones, but that's irrelevant now. I'm just going to save this in slot 1. So our campaign is always in slot 1. I'm going to overwrite the old one, and that's it. So there we go. So I'll hope to see you in the next video. May you prosper until then.